Another component in pastry is phyllo dough. Some people call it phyllo dough. Really, either pronunciation is okay. So phyllo dough is either spelled with a ph there or with the f, either one. It comes from Greek origin, and it means thin sheet or leaf. And basically, what it is like thinner than paper thin sheets of pastry that have been stacked, and in between each one, you brush melted butter or oil in between each one. It's used as like a crust. It can be used as a crust or like a wrapper for sweet or savory fillings. So, again, you're typically seeing this being used for appetizers or desserts. So, phyllo dough is made from flour, water, oil, and eggs. And because of its Greek origin, sometimes yogurt is actually Greek yogurt is used as well, because that is just really integral to that region and to their geography. The dough is pretty tricky to make because it's many layers of, again, like paper thin dough, like holding up one sheet and being able to like clearly see my hand through it, like that thin. So again, this is one that typically we just store, we just buy at the store for convenience, and it comes in a couple of different ways, which I'll show you. But this is really the process if you were going to make it from scratch. Okay, so you could see that process there. And then I like at the end, they show you that picture. So then you can see once it's baked, the little layers or all the many layers that come from it. So again, it's tricky to make because you see like that little bit of dough that didn't make a lot. And she split that into 32 different layers. And it was probably the size of like, I don't know, a 9-inch circle when she first rolled them out. And then look at how big it got towards the end. And the cornstarch there does a couple of things, but mostly it just prevents the layers from really sticking together. And so that is phyllo dough from scratch. So from scratch, kind of difficult, and so a lot of the times it's made for us and we buy it. So it comes in sheets like this. Okay, it comes in like little pre-baked shells like this. So I remember one year my sister-in-law used those and just put like pumpkin pie filling, and that was like a little dessert for Thanksgiving. Super cute appetizer, little dessert, and then they just come like in this mini phyllo shell package. This one is literally like if you would just cut super thin strips of the layers here in this big sheet, then that is katefi, and that is just like fun little strands of it. And so you can see they kind of do this fun like little nest right here, like this little bowl of phyllo dough. And so all of this comes, it's in the freezer section, so you will need to like let it thaw out before you use it. So, what can you use this for? Again, sweet or savory. So typically you're seeing it be an appetizer or dessert. Pinwheels are really popular with these. So we talked about that with puff pastry, but you can also use that with phyllo dough. Baklava, that's probably the most common recipe that people think of when they think of phyllo dough. And so it's pretty much layers of phyllo dough, a blend of nuts, and then sweeteners like honey. So very sweet, very delicious if you've never had it. So here's just a little video about working with phyllo dough. Gives you some good tips about like really observing the dough and how you know if the dough is good to use or if it's like old or if it's dried out, and just some different tips and tricks. And then he makes just a little kind of dessert cup while he's going through this.
Hey guys, Thomas Joseph here, and today we are not going to fear the phyllo dough. Now, phyllo dough, it is quite tricky, but today I'm going to show you how you go about buying it, storing it, defrosting it, and ultimately using it to create a wonderful flaky dessert. In front of me, this is how phyllo dough comes. It usually comes actually in a box in the freezer section of your supermarket, or if you can find it at a specialty store, that's great too. And what you need to do when you bring it home from the supermarket, you need to defrost it first because it is frozen. And defrosting it, you want to make sure that you do that in the refrigerator up to about 6 hours, or you can even do it overnight. You want to make sure that the entire pack of phyllo is completely defrosted before you begin using it. Otherwise, you might tear it. This has been defrosted overnight, and it's also been sitting out at room temperature for about 10 minutes. So open up the plastic, and you should be able to, if you purchased a nice brand of phyllo dough, you should be able to unroll it, and there shouldn't be any major tears or rips. If you see a discoloration around the edges here, or if there are a lot of dry spots that are cracked, that means that your phyllo dough is old. It's probably past its expiration date, and you really should either return the package to the store or go buy a different brand. This looks perfect just like it is here. Now, if you are working with phyllo dough and you're doing something that's a little time consuming, what you want to make sure to do is to cover this with a damp cloth. Now you can buy one of these spritzer bottles and spritz the cloth, or you can kind of dampen it with a faucet and just make sure it's wrung out really well. And what this will do is will keep the dough from drying out too much, which will make it brittle, which will make it crack. So phyllo is leaf in Greek. So all of these little layers of dough are considered leaves of dough. Now, there are other versions of phyllo dough out there in the market, and this one I have in front of me is shredded phyllo dough, which is really very interesting. It's called kataifi, Kataifi, and you need to defrost it in the same manner. It comes frozen, and when you're ready to use it, you need to break it apart slightly, loosen it up because it is kind of compact, and you want to separate it into kind of long strands like this. And you can do so many different things with this. You can create desserts with this. You could wrap shrimp with this, or asparagus, or any type of little hors d'oeuvre. And it creates a little nest around whatever you're making. So you can really form and mold this as you see fit. I'm not going to be using this version today, but if you haven't experimented with it, you should certainly do that. So I'm making something really simple. I'm not making baklava or any other dessert that is quite complex. I'm making just little phyllo cups, and the method in using phyllo is all the same no matter what dessert or dish you're making. So you need to work sheet by sheet or leaf by leaf, And you can tell that this is really good quality phyllo dough and that it's not too old because I could easily move it from one place to the next. Now, keep the others covered so they do not dry out. And one important thing that you need to do whenever you're working with phyllo is you need to layer it with fat. So similar to puff pastry where you have layers of dough and then layers of fat, and then you keep kind of rolling out and folding and creating more and more layers, you're doing something very similar when you work with phyllo. So I have a very thin sheet of dough, and to that I'm going to add a layer of butter in the melted form. You really want to be liberal with your butter. You could certainly use olive oil if you were making something savory. Some people even clarify the butter, which is removing the milk solids. If you wanted to use an alternate fat as well, that would be fine here. Coconut oil, that's all the rage these days, and you could certainly use that in the melted form to brush on your layers of phyllo dough. So the little dessert cups that I'm making today that I'm going to fill with a simple cream mixture, they're almost like little tartlets. The recipe I'm using, which you can find at marthastewart.com, has a liberal sprinkling of sugar in between the layers. So I'm using regular granulated sugar here. You could use demerara sugar, which is that nice brown raw sugar. You could even sprinkle in some spice in between these layers. But really, what I'm doing here is I'm creating multiple layers, which in the oven, the butter will create steam, and that steam will create air pockets, which will give a wonderful flakiness to this dessert. So this gets a little repetitive, but this is the process. You're going to continue on, and I'm going to do 3 layers, but you could do all the way up to 6 or 8 layers, depending on how crunchy and flaky you want your dessert to be. So again, it's brushing with butter, sprinkling with sugar until you have 3 layers. So this is the last layer and the last bit of sugar on the top here. And now I'm going to cut this into 6 squares. So that means I'm going to cut it down the middle lengthwise. Now use a really sharp knife here to cut this. So I'm going to cut this now into thirds. You want to take each square of dough that you have, and you're going to place this into your muffin cups. This is a standard cupcake tin or muffin tin, and you want to really go every other well of the muffin tin, and you're just going to gently push the sides in. You can lift up the dough on the sides here to help create a nice fluted shell. And this is a wonderful vessel for any sort of filling. You could fill these with lemon curd. You can fill them with pudding. You could put a cappuccino cream, which is what we're going to be filling these with today. Anything you want. And these go into the oven, 325 degrees for about 20 minutes. The sugar is going to get nice and caramelized. It's going to give even more flavor and a little bit of crunch. So our phyllo cups, they're out of the oven. They've cooled completely. Now, all you have to do is be very careful now, because since there are only 3 layers here, they're pretty fragile. I'm going to go right onto a plate. I have my cappuccino cream, which is a really simple recipe, you guys. Go on marthastewart.com and find that recipe. But you could certainly fill these with whatever you would like. To top it all off, I'm going to add a little bit of shaved chocolate on top. And there you go, guys. You have a really simple, fun dessert. Do not fear the phyllo. And if you have any kitchen conundrums, any of those baking conundrums, always let us know by commenting in the section below. Enjoy!
All right, so just a nice overview of working with phyllo dough and just different tips and tricks, and then you got to see a nice little dessert being made. So similar to with puff pastry, there is an assignment in Google Classroom. Once you have watched this puff or this phyllo dough kind of presentation, have a couple just video recap questions, and then you'll just be looking up some recipes.